Hey guys, welcome to episode 13 of Maniacs. And today we are interviewing Matthew. He was a teacher at Harvest Preparatory School from 2018 until 2022. So he did start a year before I did, but most of his career there and mine, we worked together. And he would like to share his experiences there, not only as a teacher at Harvest Preparatory School, but also as a parent of a student that attended Harvest Preparatory School. So please help me welcome Matthew to Megamaniacs. Hi, Matthew. Welcome to Megamaniacs.
Hi, Robin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. Good to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, I'm gonna, I always kind of start the episodes like I start the other one. So, I guess start off by telling us how you ended up at Harvest Prep as a teacher.
Yeah. So, kind of. I guess it would be a different perspective than many of the other guests because I knew nothing about the place. I knew nothing about World Harvest Church or Harvest Prep or anything like that. I was working as a teacher for Eastland Career Center in the adult workforce program, and I had put out, a couple of like a resume on Indeed or something like that, and saw that and said, okay, they want a music teacher. I studied music, so that was my, main focus. So I went ahead and applied, got a call for an interview, went down, met with the principal, and did the interview, and then they gave me a call back, and I accepted. So, you know, uh, it was kind of like you said. I didn't know anything about the place when I was hired. I knew no one other than once I was hired. I told my friends. I heard a lot of comments like, "Well, don't drink the Kool-Aid while you're there." And of course, I had no idea what that meant. I was coming in totally
Yeah.
fresh. So, but that was it.
So, and when you started there, it was actually after the school year had already started. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So the school year was about a month in before I was actually hired, or at least I
Okay.
would say 3 weeks in. So yeah, it was a different kind of start to a school year, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, I had well, I mean, they did give me a week to set up my room once I was hired, so that was nice. But yeah, it was a little bit odd coming in.
Yeah. And did you ever get an explanation or understanding of did they hire someone else and then they didn't work out, or did someone like abruptly quit? Do you know what happened with that situation?
I don't know entirely. I do know that when I applied and when I was interviewed, um, it was late. It was already, I think, close to mid-August, I think, whenever that entire process went down. So
Oh, okay.
I would assume that someone abruptly left, or at least that would kind of be my assumption of the matter. I didn't, bother to ask. I don't ever think, but yeah, I mean, but
Okay.
it kind of that seems to make the most sense of it, you know.
Hmm.
So, mhm.
Well, and I know from my time there, that we would have, you know, usually several teachers that as we got closer to the school year starting, maybe even a week or two out, that we would have abrupt resignations or teachers that said they were accepting a position and then they got a better offer, or they for whatever reason they didn't come, and so we would always have openings, and it would be a struggle to find teachers and be able to fill the positions before school started. So I would also assume that based on that, your assumption that that would be mine too, only because I know that that happened every year that I was there. So So okay, so tell us, like, once you got in and you got started, did your because I know at some point your son was a student there. Was he a student when you first started?
No, he ended up coming in a little bit later that year, though. I would say
Okay.
the decision to transfer him to there was based upon the fact that I did work there. It was a private school, but he kind of wanted to like keep, have him in the same building, which was nice. He didn't have to ride a bus. They gave us one of the things that was nice was that they did give us free what they call extended care for employees. So
Yes.
he had care until I was done, so I didn't have to pay for any type of school aftercare, things like that. So, but that wasn't until probably I would say January. So probably the start of the next year, but the same school year, if you will. So that was 2018. So uh, after winter break, when we came back after the new year, would have been when he started.
Okay, like January 2019, and then I started in February of 2019. So I know that I met your son, and both of my sons had you for music. So was and obviously we were colleagues as well. So once you got settled in, what kind of was the experience as the school year progressed?
It was just hectic, honestly. For a first school year, it is probably the only word that you could really describe it. It was complete. I mean, just being kind of thrown into what you would almost call a mess. That would probably be the best way. So, like I said, it was nice. They did give me that week to figure things out, but then afterwards, there was nothing as far as like communication of like, hey, if I need this, what do I do? If I need this? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? You were just totally thrown in, um, and it was like a sink or swim situation.
Hmm.
So you figured it out, and my position was unique because to kind of dive into what it's like being a music teacher there, I was one teacher for the entire school. So one teacher for the lower school, or I was the music teacher for the middle school, or in the upper school. So kind of
So
all
kindergarten through 12th grade, just so everyone is aware.
kindergarten
So
through 12.
how do you even fit that many music classes into your schedule?
I don't even know how it was done, but man, it was done. I saw each class once a week, and and it was divided up into little blocks. And I think the first year they were 40-minute blocks. I think the second year that I was there, it kind of got cut back to like 30-minute blocks, which was really even more difficult. I mean, it sounds like that would make it easier on the teacher. Oh, less time to prepare for. No, it's really difficult to get things done in that amount of time. Hard enough in 40 minutes. So yeah, it kind of became like it was a very stressful position for that because you're switching your entire mindset of how to teach. Like 1 minute you've got a kindergarten class, and then, 40 minutes later you got a sixth grade class. It's like, what do you do? So, uh, after midday though, after like the kids' lunch and stuff, then that was all upper school. That was all like middle school band, high school band, and then eventually choir and stuff like that. So, the nice part, though, how we did make that work better was after the first year, we combined middle and high school band. So,
Oh,
grades
okay.
7 through 12 were all in one class. And that made the band a bit bigger, too, because it was a relatively small program, at least at that time. So, I don't know what it is now.
Okay. Okay. And then I didn't actually mention this in your introduction, but at some point you were also teaching a music class at Valor. Is that right?
Yeah, that was actually in that first school year as well. I started
Oh, okay.
the
Okay.
class.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was the spring semester of 2019. So you know how they start to, once again, after winter break, when that spring semester started up, I was hired to teach that first class.
Okay. Okay. So, obviously, I know we'll kind of get into trying to juggle all of those things, and even the fact of almost feeling kind of forced to take any extra opportunities just to make a livable wage. But what, I guess, what was your experience that first year? I mean, you obviously stayed for 4 years. So, would you say that that first year was positive? Was it more negative? Did it leave you questioning anything? I mean, what was that experience like, if you remember?
Yeah, no, that first year left me a little bit frustrated. But I also kind of grew immediately attached to like building relationships with the students and the kids, and then that's probably why I stayed so long. Was you know, uh, as soon as I got there, I saw kind of what needed to be done. But yeah, that first year was really, really tough because kind of to start out, let's start with high school. When I came into the high school, with high school band, one thing that I noticed was just like the lack of instruments available to the kids, and particularly in a high school setting. If you've never seen a high school marching band or looked at, or been in a band room or a part of that, the majority of the percussion instruments are school owned. Okay, it's a pretty big investment, but they're school owned and so forth. We had next to nothing when I got there. I mean, there was a few snare drums that were hardly functioning. There was a couple of bass drums, things that all needed, quite a bit of work. They were all donated, from my understanding, I believe from Pickerington or from Canal, one of those places. And so there wasn't much to work with there. But when the kids came in, and I was trying to get like a feel of what do they know, what have they worked on, because I was giving nothing. I had no idea who the previous director was to reach out and say, hey, can you give me kind of an idea of what's happening? I had no one to talk to. It was only me for as the music department. So I just put a couple of little pieces in front of the kids and said, hey, can you play this? Hey, can you play this? And it was an immediate like, no, we can't do that, we can't do this. um, and so that really became frustrating until a couple of the kids who were older, these were seniors, they kind of said, hey, let's play this piece. And I think it was called Pirate's Cave. And now, to kind of give you an idea, in band, music is graded based upon a couple of things. One is difficulty, right? So it's graded upon difficulty. And the next thing it's graded upon is instrumentation. So it's kind of like a half grading system. So you have like 0.5 being one of the lowest grades that you could play, right? All the way up to like grade 4, grade 5. Pirate's Cave was a point 0.5 piece. Okay, easiest possible for instrumentation, easiest possible for as far as difficulty goes. And this was a high school group that should have been playing at least somewhere in the, I would say at least in the 2.5, 3.5 range is playing point 0.5. And that's what they were excited to show me. So we played it, and I was just like kind of thrown back, that's what they knew. And they couldn't really do anything above that, let
So, and
alone
this
have.
was not to interrupt you, but this was a theoretically a class that was offered before you took the job, or was this a brand new class?
No, no, this was just high school band. This was in that first year, and this had a big influence on me deciding to ask for middle school and high school to be combined because they were separate that year. But
Okay.
this was high school band, the highest level band class that we offered. 9 through 12, they've been playing their instruments for 3 to 4 years at that point in time. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Pirates,
So
yeah.
you're talking about kids that have been playing for several years, are still at a degree level that would be the most simplistic out of all of the levels.
Yes, like they were like Pirates Cave would be something that well, actually later on I think I gave to sixth graders. Um,
Oh, okay.
if
Okay.
that makes sense. Says
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know you teach you teached, and now I need to take English classes. You taught music, but did you notice or did you hear that because obviously the kids were very behind, it seems, even in music and in band. Did you notice that coming from the kids in other areas as well?
Um, yeah, there was a lot of red flags, but hard things that to understand, to kind of take it back, I was so busy that I would notice these things, but then the thought process went to, okay, well, maybe they're learning them now or something. I've got to get back to what I'm doing. I mean, I've got to get back to over here. I can't focus on that because things were so crazy as far as time. But yeah, and it really became apparent to me during COVID, whenever everything was shut down, everybody was fully online. I had to start. We all were scrambling. We didn't know what to do as teachers, but we were trying to figure it all out. But that's another story. But one of the first things that I had was, short answer questions. Listen to this piece of music and tell me what you thought about it. Write this prompt. Little things that would provide points for the kids, actually give them, something that I could put in while we couldn't play. And after that, we did have other things where we could play. We had a program where we could record and they would their parts and send it and so forth. But the writing was really a huge eye opener to me. I had many students that, I was told were, and I, knew as were straight A students. Many of them were top of their class. Like, I think the one graduated valedictorian of her class. And her writing did not reflect that, we'll say. It did not reflect that. I wish I still had those papers, but obviously, like, when I left, anything like that I ended up getting rid of. I don't want to keep
Mhm.
hold of um, work like
And
that.
can you when you talk about, that was a red flag and like a huge eye opener, was it the content, was it the writing style, was it the techniques that were being used? I mean, what was it that you were really concerned that maybe kids were struggling in other areas, not just in your class?
Yeah, so a lot of the papers that I received, a lot of the essays, they would just be one long running sentence, right? It would just be a run-on
Oh.
sentence would be one thing that would happen. Another one that I saw was there would be no paragraph indentations. There would be no ending of one paragraph, beginning of the next. There was really no formatting to
Mm,
what I was receiving, and the grammatical errors and stuff, they were pretty bad for kids that
okay.
age.
Okay.
Um, yeah, not knowing how to, I mean, even from not using proper end marks, like there would be questions and there would be no question mark at the end of it, those types of
Mm,
things. There would be a period
mhm.
there, instead of a question mark, just simple things like that. Um, Abbreviations, and I know that we all have dealt with this, but having LOL written in on an essay is just not acceptable. Most teachers have dealt with that.
Yeah, not from a high schooler anyways, right?
Right, right.
And did you ever discuss your concerns with like administration or any other teachers when it came to the writing issues that you were seeing?
Yeah, I did, and I brought up a couple of things as well, and I noticed, you know, that one of the things that was definitely being taught to the kids was a old type of formatting for essays and so forth and papers, and something that wasn't even used anymore. It's like MLA formatting, and you know, for one thing, to teach it and have it used in that context is great, but we're dealing with kids who are juniors and seniors applying for uh, colleges and scholarships and all of these things like that. And not one of them knew what I meant whenever I mentioned APA format, which is pretty much what every higher education institution requires their students to write in, is to write
Hmm.
APA format. And none of these kids knew what I was talking about, and so forth. So, yeah, they had
Okay.
no idea.
Yeah, and I know kind of the one of the notes that I wrote just based on our previous conversation was that there were huge discrepancies in what administration was saying about students compared to their actual abilities. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
very
I've heard that from other teachers, and that was one of the reasons that I was excited that you wanted to be on the podcast, was because we have really yet to hear from an actual teacher that was at Harvest Prep, and the fact that you saw every grade level, I think you can give a better perspective and kind of indication of where some of these students were, and even just the experience as a teacher there. So I was excited that you were able to do that, because I haven't had many teachers that have wanted to be on the podcast. And I think that it's important not only for the audience to hear your perspective, but even your perspective at some point as a parent with your son in the school. And I don't think you experienced as many issues as some families did with your son, but there were certainly some issues there. So you I'm kind of trying to figure out kind of where the to transition here, but let's talk about the because you had talked about the instruments. So your last year there, you were asked to start a marching band, and of course you said yes. And I don't know if there was more that went into it, but you said yes. And you were still in the same position that you really didn't have many instruments for the kids. This was going to be a huge investment if every kid that wanted to be in the marching band have all of the appropriate uniform and the instruments. And you were kind of tasked with trying to get donations and to raise money for your program, because I also want to say, I don't know how things are being done now, but there was no PTO or PTA. There was no boosters club. There was not any like alumni association where you would a lot of schools would get their donations and help to raise money. So where did that leave you in trying to make sure that you had everything that you needed so you and the students could be successful?
Yeah, um, that was a really big task. So the marching band. So we'll to kind of take it step by step here. The last year that I was there, yeah, that's when the marching band idea was really coming forward. Previously, the entire idea was to build up to that.
Okay.
And so it was an overall goal, like an overarching goal over the whole thing as we grew as a program, and we were kind of getting to the point where it was possible from a student standpoint as well, from having the numbers and band and so forth. So now at that point in time, I had a friend who was actively going out and looking for instruments for us. And she was actually spending her own money at times too, to buy instruments, and then she would send them to me, and either I would fix them up, or or she would go take them, and she would get them fixed up. And she was, just a very nice lady. I've taught her private lessons on the side for many years, And she just, went out and found what we could. So that way we had some things there. Other times it was asking. I would get on Facebook Marketplace actually, and just Google band instruments. Or well, obviously not
Mm.
Google because it's Facebook Marketplace, but yeah, I digress.
But search it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and just ask people who were putting instruments like flutes, clarinets, saxophones, trumpets, all of that on there, saying, "Hey, found this, in my closet, no longer need it, $25." And I would just ask, "Hey, would you be willing to donate this?" And so I kept a little receipt book. I would give them a receipt saying they donated it. I had kept track of all of these things, and we built up the instrumentation that way. But building percussion is a little bit different, and that one was it. It takes some time. So what ended up happening there was I needed to build the entire basic instrumentation of the concert band first because it's different for concert band than it is for marching. So in order to start the concert band, and what we would do is compete in what was called the large group ensemble for OMEA, the Ohio Music Education Association, which is a huge event. A lot of schools participate. You go in, you play your pieces, you get a rating stating, or giving you comments and saying how you did as a group, overall as a band, and so forth. And it's really a great experience and a great performance experience outside of the school for the kids. And so, but in order to do that, once again, we had to get that grade level up from point 0.5. So we worked our way up into the second and third year I was there around to be to 2.5 is where we got to. And all that time I was collecting instruments. I did get some funding to buy a actual xylophone. Oh, sorry, like a actual concert xylophone, a nice 3-octave xylophone and stuff, and that was brand new. I had to get timpanis, which timpanis are incredibly expensive, and or for a set, you're talking for, I mean, a decent new timpani one, I think is probably between 7,000, probably, and most schools have a set of four, you
Wow.
know. So that one was an experience because I found someone in Michigan who was like getting rid of all of this stuff that they didn't need. They had a school, I think, something like that, but they had closed down, and they had two timpanis. And I said, well, if I find my way up there, would you be willing to donate them? So that ended up happening. We rented a U-Haul, and I drove, I think it was a Saturday, all the way up and back um, in one day to get those timpanis. And then we acquired two more through a similar situation. So we ended up having a full set. So building things like that is kind of what we had to do. We had to figure out how to make it work because, like you said, there was no boosters, there was nothing coming in like or money wise for that, and fundraising was a hard sell to the kids, and especially to the parents who. Many are already paying tuition, many are already paying fees for their sports and things like that. This is the last thing that they needed. So I tried everything. I did like a Domino's pizza fundraiser one year, um, to bring in a little bit of money. That didn't work too well. But there towards the end, we really started to bring in money through selling the Roosters discount cards. And for those that aren't familiar with Roosters, it's like a really cool restaurant with really good chicken wings, and you ask them to like be a part of this program, and they literally give you the cards for free, telling you you sell these for $10 per card. It's a discount. You can use the discount however many times throughout the entire year, but it's 100% profit. So when we became a larger group, about 40, 45 members, including of high school, middle school combined,
Mhm.
that's still relatively small, but for private school, that's pretty big.
Yeah. It was a good size. Yeah.
Yeah, and so each kid, selling 10 cards and stuff brought in a ton of money. And we had kids that were selling, 15, 20 cards at a time. And we were actually bringing in money, but it became, like I said, I think I said, when we originally spoke, that it became pretty unethical because there was no accountability for this money, you know? And even whenever I turned it in, I didn't know where it ended up going. I think the one year I turned the money in and then I asked about it later, and they were like, I kind of got, some kind of brushed off answer like, oh yeah, yeah, and then they like, went away. So I don't know where half of that money ended up going anyways. But from my standpoint, if I wanted to be like, evil, I could have, because that money just sat in the desk of my, or in my office. It just sat there. And anybody that had a master key could have gotten in, and so forth. Like, it could have been stolen at any point in time, and there would have been nothing I could do about it. So
Mhm.
that was like that was that situation. We did end up fundraising quite a bit, and the last year that I was there, we started. And this was actually an administrative idea for the high school. They said, if you donate so much, we'll put your name on a plaque, or we'll get like your name on a plaque, and that'll be like a plaque of people that donated to start this marching band. And some of the organizations that already existed, like the football team, their boosters program, they donated a certain amount to us to help get that started. But it still was never quite enough, because to understand a brand new cheap, like maybe cheap marching band percussion set is going to run, I think, well, we ended up spending, when we finally got it, it was like $16,000, I think, for
Wow.
everything.
Wow.
But that doesn't include uniforms, because if you want to know
Right.
how expensive that gets, when you see the kids out there with their full marching band uniform on, it's about, I think, in, granted, I haven't looked these prices up since I've left,
Okay.
but I think then it was between $1,100 and $1,200 per student to outfit them.
Wow. And what was the accountability that you had to make this successful? I mean, were you being your feet being held to the fire to make sure this was happening, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, pretty much. It was at the beginning, it was something that was stated like, hey, we eventually want a marching band. And then it became, hey, we need a marching band, and then it became, hey, what are you doing? And that was, yeah, that was exactly the whole concept, was that at least it felt to me like my job was on the line if I wasn't going to get this done. Uh,
Mm,
you know, and
yeah.
there there did there towards the end, like I said, that money, that $16,000, we did not raise that. That came from other sources of funding, right?
Okay.
But it would have been nice to know that we could have done that like in previous years, to have the things that we really needed before that, and to this day, I mean, I've been gone for a couple years now, and I still don't think they have a program. I don't believe they're close, from my understanding.
Yeah,
So
I don't think so either. And speaking of that kind of situation, did you notice that money was being spent or put into other areas instead of the music program, or that maybe it wasn't being as well spent as it could be for your program?
yeah, I mean, there was always something like that happening, and I'm trying to remember like specific things, but money was always being spent somewhere. And most of the time it did go to athletics. There was a lot of money in athletics. Now, there's a lot to be said for that, because that happens everywhere. There's money in athletics. There's money to be
Sure.
made in high school athletics and so forth. But where the successful programs just seem to keep getting anything that they wanted, constantly. And we were a very small program that had a lot to prove, and we I mean, we fought tooth and nail for what we got. A lot of times, I was told, oh, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. Um, and I tried to keep it to the point where the only thing that I was actually spending money on each year at a minimum was sheet music. Actually buying sheet music for concert programs and so forth. And much of that in the lower school I didn't even buy. I created. I did myself, or or would arrange myself what was played, record parts of it, and we used that as the background for the kids. So there was a lot of that going on, things that I could do to save money to make it successful, because spending, $90 to $100 on sheet music seemed like a task. And so I tried to avoid that, avoid going down that route at all costs, because I didn't know where the money was coming from, every single time. And I even purchased, I did this actually, and I purchased music myself with my own money, um,
Mm.
for the kids. And
Which
I
we
did.
know, we know teachers, at many different schools kind of have to do that, unfortunately. But, since I don't know, I think you've kind of followed the podcast somewhat. When you've seen some of the episodes where money is being very frivolously spent in the organization, I mean, how did that make you feel when this music program was your responsibility and they kept saying they didn't have money, but in fact they did. They just didn't want to spend it in the school or in your program specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I probably uttered some words I probably shouldn't have to myself when I was listening to those,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's like it's very frustrating to see that all of these things around you are happening, but your program's suffering, you know?
Mhm.
And it's not suffering due to lack of commitment from you, which that's kind of what you're made to believe at times, you know? It's more so because you don't have the support, you don't have the funding. In no way should anyone, and I can't remember what the exact enrollment was, but I mean, when I left, I know it had to have been close to 800
It
kids.
was. It
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
In no way, shape, or form should there be one teacher for one subject, no matter what that subject is, for grades kindergarten through 12. I mean, that never should have been the case. And, even before I was there, it never should have been the case. There at least should have been one teacher for the lower school, one teacher for upper school. And that's only fair to the kids to provide that. Um, but
Well,
then to
and
say that they're
to you as the or to for any teacher, I mean, you can't be as successful as you want to be when you're overwhelmed, but you were paid very well as a teacher for having all of those grade levels, right?
no. Nope. I was paid the same as, same starting salary as everybody else, and yeah, and that
Which
was
your
yeah.
first year there, you said was 32,000 a year.
Mhm.
And when and I just want to explain this really quickly. I think I did in one of the episodes, but really quickly. So when I started there in 2019, the starting salary for teachers with no experience was $29,000. And then if you had experience, you got $500 per year of experience. And then if you had a master's degree, you got an additional $1,000 per year. Um, we got that raised to 32,000 for starting salary. And then by the time that I left in 2022, it was 39,000 as a starting salary for teachers. But you're talking, $32,000 a year, and then you got what, like a $500 increase or some kind of percentage every year. But you were compelled to take on any opportunity that they ask you to take on just so that you had a livable wage, right?
Yeah, yeah, and because I am still, the provider for my family. So
Yeah.
anything that I could do to make extra income, I needed to do. So, and that included, and I had those incentives on top. Like I completed my master's after that first year. I was in the middle of my master's program when I was hired, and I completed my master's after that first year. So the second year, I got the $1,000 incentive on top of that, and so forth. And then, like you said, I started teaching at Valor, and that became like it gradually rolled into something that became more livable because I was just teaching one class, a 1 credit hour class to begin. And then that became, later on 2 classes, 3 classes. And I think by the time I left, I was teaching 3 classes a semester, 3 or 4 classes a semester. So about the equivalent of, I think, 12 credit hours a school or a total school year for
Hmm.
them. So yeah, but anything that I could do, I had to kind of piece together to make something livable out of that, $32,000 base salary with everything on top. So yeah, and I mean, by the time I left, I was close to, and this is well, this is the other thing too. Whenever you got, you said, in 2022, the hiring salary was 39,000,
Hmm.
right? Well, those of us that were there previously, we didn't get bumped up to that, and then the incentives on top, we were still building. So I was at 30, I think I was at 39,000 whenever I left. I
Yeah.
think no, I was below that. I think I was at 38 whenever I left. So and then on I could add the Valor incentive on top of that, and then I was also the head baseball coach for a couple of years. So that added a little bit on top of that as well. Other than that, I
I
had
don't
to
know how
work
you found
outside.
the time to do all of these things. I mean, good thing that they had the aftercare,
Yeah.
which was free to staff members, but that was because either that would ensure that you were going to work more hours because you knew that someone was watching your kid,
Mhm.
or you had to take on these additional incentives and opportunities so that you could make a little extra cash, and then you had to spend some of it apparently to buy instruments.
Yeah. And not to mention, however much they asked for it back in donations and tithing and all of that type of stuff. Um,
Right. Well, and tell us about that, because you were kind of like me, in the fact that you worked there and your kid went to school there, my kids went to school there, but neither one of us went to church there. But how often were, you asked to give money or come to meetings in the tabernacle where they were trying to sell all of us on, investing back into the organization?
Yeah, I can't remember how frequently they happened, but it was frequent. I mean, there was quite a few that we would sit in. We knew basically it got to the point where you knew if there was an all staff meeting that was called, and that included everybody from every organization within, from HPS to the church, to World Harvest Church, to Valor. When everybody was called in, you knew you were going to be asked for some type of donation, or or something like that.
Mhm.
And and I remember when they redid the pews, or when they took the pews out and they were buying the chairs,
Doing the
we were
seats,
always,
yeah.
yeah, we were asked to buy like the seat or buy a seat. That was one thing, and
Did you
and
buy one?
no, no, I didn't
I bought one.
really. I
I
mean,
bought one. They got me, Matt. They got me. Yeah, yeah,
things were so tight that I knew I just couldn't,
yeah.
and yeah, just couldn't do it,
Well,
and
I had it payroll deducted. So, I didn't pay the 250 up front, but they took it out of my check for a while.
right, yeah, yeah. So, but there were multiple things that were always offered like that.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean that when I say they were offered, they were presented to you as if they were something like a grand thing that benefited you. And there was always, yeah, I will do this payroll deduction, and I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I've lost count of how many times that happened. But like I said, it was pretty much every time we heard all staff meeting, I knew they were going to be asking for money. And I knew they were going to be calling like you to like come down and pick up the little slip to fill out for payroll deduction and all that type of stuff. And I did stick to my guns there and say no, I'm not. I can't do that.
Hmm.
So So I don't think that I ever actually did, because I think in my mind I said, yeah, I'm donating pretty much enough of my time here for all these other things, and I'm spending my own money, like I said, on sheet music, on other things, for these kids, and going out and even getting them instruments and giving them to them when they can't, when many kids couldn't afford them, because they are expensive. Musical instruments are expensive. To get a decent one, or if you look, basically, okay, so how it works is when you start beginning band, if you've never done this, the kids come in. Normally, you have a company that you're working with. They offer a rental program. Well, around Columbus and Canal Winchester, the surrounding suburbs and stuff, it's mostly music and arts, and they're great people. I loved our music and arts rep. He's a great guy, and he would come in, give a little pitch about the rental program, because it made these instruments affordable. You could pay $30 a month to rent an instrument for your kid to be a part of band. To buy it outright, it was probably somewhere around $1,500, um,
Yeah.
for a beginning
Yeah.
instrument. So you see, they're expensive, but even a lot of times kids couldn't afford the $30. So we were trying to find what we could, whether if I had it as an instrument that was already donated, or whether I got to go find one. So I was like, okay, I do enough that way. I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna, give any more of my salary back.
Give your hard earned money back. And it was no one gets into teaching because it's this super lucrative um uh career, right? You do it because you love kids and you want to invest into their lives, and you feel like that's either what you're passionate about or what your calling is. But no one, other than head leadership is getting a fair wage at World Harvest or Harvest Preparatory School or Valor for that matter. So um you weren't the only one that was in that boat. Um so what about the overall work environment? I mean, you and again, you and I worked together for several years, and we've had meetings, we've had discussions about things, and I know, from a human resources perspective of the issues that were going on within the organization, especially the school. But what was your perspective on things as a teacher?
I mean, it was yeah, the work environment was pretty tough. You were, I mean, basically, like you said, teachers don't go into teaching to become rich, right? That's not
Right.
what we do. Now, in many public schools now, you can make a decent wage,
Sure.
with your experience and so forth. But yeah, even starting out, it's still fairly low, and teachers always deserve more, and I'll always say that. But they make you remember that there. You know what I mean? And in other words, if you ask for anything extra, any type of help or anything like that, the main statement that always comes back to you is, "Oh, well, teachers aren't in it for the income, they're in it for the outcome." So anytime if you're presented like, "Hey, I need a little bit," or it's like, could you do more than the $500 raise per year?" That's the type of thing that you were met with. And you were always also met with, like, if you didn't get it done, it was lack of commitment on your end, not lack of resources, not lack of student effort or anything like that. It was you, and it was your end, and you needed to try harder. You see what I mean? It's like, if you weren't
Yeah.
putting enough in, then that's your problem. If you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, that's your problem. That's not our problem, type of thing. So
Very supportive.
yeah, right. Very supportive. I
Yeah.
remember, and I kind of felt that way, like I said, from the beginning, because I was put into my classroom. I was like, all right, here you go, and do this, and that was it.
Baptism by fire, man. Baptism by fire.
I mean, I remember sitting in a meeting and asking where I could get a trash can for my room, because my room didn't have a trash can, and something like that. As it turns out, I was expected to go by myself.
No, you weren't.
Yeah, like everybody, like, and all the, I mean, I remember sitting and some of the other teachers, I remember that was like pretty much my very first question ever in a staff meeting was, is there somewhere where I can find a trash can for my room? Because there wasn't one. And everybody just like felt dead still. Their like eyes are looking around, like, what's the response gonna be? And then one of the teachers who yeah, had been there for a very long time, he said, "Well, I have an extra one. You can have it."
Mm.
And yeah, and that became my trash can. I mean,
But
like,
even something as, you wouldn't really think of that as being something significant, but even something as, a new teacher coming in, you would expect that your room would at least have the bare necessities for you to kind of run your classroom. And if they failed to provide a trash can, what else were they failing to provide, not only you but the rest of the teachers, and that kind of trickles down to the students, because there were even issues during my time there with curriculum, and having enough curriculum and having the right curriculum, and having age appropriate books in the classroom and those sorts of things.
yeah, that was a huge issue. I remember all of those things and just how it affected some of the students, how the students, you know, even outside of like I mean I got to see a lot of it in lower school because a lot of my teacher duties were in lower school. I spent a lot of time down there, or
Okay.
in the mornings and so forth, like breakfast duty, things like that. I was, down there. Um, but yeah, they didn't have hardly anything. Upper school had more, but still not enough.
Mhm.
Upper school kind of always seemed to be more favorable of the two. But either way, the kids never got what they needed from uh, a curriculum standpoint, from resources standpoint. It was always behind. And that was something that just it caught my eye. Probably not the first year, but at least the second year I was there, it really started to kind of sink in that that was what was happening.
Yeah.
And
Do
you
you
know,
know
here,
why? Do you know why? Or do you have an idea of why upper school seemed to be favored compared to lower school?
I mean, I'm sure it had to do with performance and not necessarily performance from like a testing standpoint, but it's uh, what what did upper school bring in? You see what I mean? What did they bring in? Well, they
Uh-huh.
brought in, successful athletics. They brought in recruiting and all those types of things. What did lower school bring in? None of that. K through six didn't have that. So, or really pre-K through six, because there was a preschool as well. I
Sure.
don't know if that's there or not anymore, or if they still do that. But um, yeah, I mean, they didn't have these glamorous programs like like the athletic, like football, like basketball, and so forth, which they're if you say anything, they're athletics. Yeah, they put together good teams and so forth. Now, how they do that, the ethics of it, and so forth, recruiting, I don't know, but that is obviously more attractive from a marketing standpoint than B wing and C wing, for
Right,
lower school.
right. The little kids. And I kind of had a different perspective, and I appreciate your perspective, but the way that and that does make sense, right? And I appreciate you sharing that. Now, my perspective, because obviously I was dealing with all of the teachers and all of the grades as well. And the lower school teachers always felt like they were kind of the redheaded stepchild of the organization, that they needed things, they could never get what they needed, they would put requests in and they wouldn't be approved. And the way I kind of saw it was, you know, Mr. Mills was the principal at the time, and now he's, the head of school. And but he's also Rod Parsley's nephew. And his mom works in the enrollment office, but she actually controls a lot of the money that is allotted to World Harvest from Canal Winchester schools. And so she would get the purchase orders, and she could deny or approve essentially anything that she wanted, and really never communicated, to my understanding, why something would be denied. And they, the principal of the lower school or the teachers would just find out when they didn't get what they requested.
And yeah, and that is, I would definitely agree that that is an accurate perspective because, one thing that I didn't know about what you said though was that his mom was the one approving or denying. I didn't know that. I thought that that went to Canal. I thought that that went into like, their board or whomever, and they sat down and approved that funding being spent
Oh,
for it. See, that's what I thought. But if she was doing that, that is really eye-opening, because yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. That's very eye-opening because, like I said, we're back to previously when we finally got that or all of that percussion instrument, the $16,000 worth of stuff. That was canal funding. So I
oh,
submitted those forms and the
okay.
POs and so forth. And I don't know who or when they approved. I mean, I would, yeah. So that makes sense because it was something that was heavily put on me. It was said, hey, this needs to be done. And I presented them with it. And of course, immediate no's and stuff. And that took a while. But then that makes sense because he did want that to start taking off. And I think I finally did get him to understand the cost. So, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me now.
Yeah, and it's the process just never really seemed fair, from a stance of, you have certain things going on in the lower school. They are requesting new curriculum or new what's the pads that you guys used?
Oh, the
Chromebooks.
Chromebooks.
So because they wanted to be one to one, and all of those sorts of things. But then there were times again that requests were being put in, and nothing was being communicated, nothing was being said. And obviously, with Mr. Mills being a part of the administration, he could give his 2 cents. And I'm sure that his mom was probably asking him at times, like, which POs should I approve? Which shouldn't I approve? Because we only have this amount of money. And so at the end of the day, he was going to make sure that, his upper school was taken care of before the rest of the school was being taken care of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you could see that. And even whenever things came in for like the Chromebooks, like you mentioned, whenever lower school finally got those Chromebooks, they were hand-me-down Chromebooks. I do remember that. They were
Yeah.
Chromebooks that were outdated, but they were the upper school's previously owned Chromebooks, and those just went mostly to, I think, fifth and sixth grade to start. And from there, I mean, that was still like I said, my last year, my last 2 years when they actually started outfitting the kids with those Chromebooks, and well, I mean, extra funding was coming in then too because of COVID money. So we'll say that if that's what
Hmm.
was there or not. But that was, yeah, I do remember those types of things happening. Curriculum was always something that was like a huge question mark down there in lower school, and it seemed like the kids were struggling with and they were constantly struggling, but the teachers were always struggling with having enough, and they were frustrated. And whenever like teaching is stressful enough, even when you have close to what you need. Teaching is stressful enough, um, but to add those things on top of it, you wonder why we had many situations like we had. And I'll be the first to say, yeah, there were teachers there that were constantly screaming at kids, raising their, and I mean screaming, you know, uh, it wasn't like a raise your voice for a moment type of thing. I think I walked by, and at one point I even walked by my son's classroom, and a teacher was just totally degrading the kids, talking to them about how, they'll send them to Columbus City if they don't, shape up and stuff. And I'm just like, are you kidding? First of all, a elementary school kid probably doesn't even understand what you're talking about when you say
Mhm.
that. Second of all, they stopped listening to you about 10 minutes ago, like, or your rant about 10
Right.
minutes ago. Like,
Yeah.
but there's something to be said because the stress involved with that, what led that teacher to do that? What led that teacher to that point? It is probably not just student behavior. And if it is student behavior, then there's something that needs to be done, you know?
Hmm.
So, but that was good, my perspective of it, the things that I saw, the things that I noticed, um, and not to mention, the kids that were just not provided with what they needed to be successful. Like that's such a
Hmm.
huge problem in itself, especially whenever you're charging so much for tuition per year.
Absolutely. Well, and I know one of the things that you brought up that I probably should have been aware of, but I wasn't aware of was that there were several kids that were ESL, so English as a second language, and there were no services offered to these kids that English was not their first language. And so, but they were still, expected to be successful. The teacher was still expected to make sure that these kids were learning at the same pace as the other kids, but with no resources. And I was completely flabbergasted back by that because I wasn't aware that that was as much of an issue as it was. Or
Yeah,
is, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's still a thing.
I imagine it definitely is. I imagine so because, yeah, there are a lot of students there whose parents were or are immigrants or either or they're first generation, uh, you know, and the kids are like I said, they're coming to school and they're speaking the language of school, English. They're going home and they're speaking whatever their parents speak. So the miscommunication there is pretty vast, right? Between or from student to parent, right? Or from even teacher to parent. That's massive. But think about, that child's ability to learn. Because obviously they're speaking, and speaking is a language is one thing. Learning to write in that language is something completely different. And these kids are not being serviced at all. They're not being helped. And so basically at that point, like the money, or they're just taking their money for tuition, they're not giving them what they need. And these kids are believing that they have, you know, a credible education. And it's just not the case. And it's not helping anyone, um, well, other than, the school. So, but the kids themselves, yeah, they're struggling, and they're going to continue to struggle, and that's why, in one of your episodes, one of your episodes from I think season one, you were talking about test scores, and I imagine I'm not going to give out an exact number because I don't know it, but I imagine a lot of those test scores are reflective of those ELLs and or the English language learners, and not even just English language learners, but also students who are not being serviced for things like IEPs, 504
Right.
plans. Maybe they're on them. Maybe they're not receiving. Maybe their plan isn't being followed, or maybe they're not being given the accommodations because one of the things that we know is that they didn't have services for that either. But we still
Right.
had, students on IEPs. But uh, and there were a couple of teachers that were there from Canal to
The title
service
teachers.
the Title One teachers, yeah, but there's no way that they helped everyone. There's no way that that was going on because I know for a fact that there were so many students um, that fit into that category.
Hmm. Well, there were stipulations on those title teachers where they could only work with certain kids. And they, predominantly most of the kids that were at Harvest Prep were designated to go to a Columbus City school, and those title teachers were they would have serviced those kids probably the most because that was predominantly the school, but they were not working with those kids because of the parameters that were set, um, because they were from Canal Winchester. So they were there to work with kids that would have been in those school districts only.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and again, that percentage is very small compared to the amount of kids that, 80 or 90% of the kids are there on ed choice, which means they're designated to a failing school district, which is usually Columbus City schools. And they were not getting the services. Those Title I teachers were just not available to them, which is it's very, very sad. So let's talk about, you mentioned, I wrote this down, that you had an overwhelming sense of obligation to Harvest Prep and almost like an unhealthy commitment. And I think that you explained why that was, in what you've already said about not being paid enough, not having the resources, but feeling an obligation to those kids. And that's kind of what kept you there, and why you stayed. But was there during that time, were there situations or a situation that stuck out as just being very disappointing to you as a teacher?
Um, yeah, I mean, well, there was quite a few experiences like that, quite a few things that were like these letdowns, and so forth. And I mean, do you mean like from a student standpoint, or from like a teacher standpoint, or just like overall experiences that were tough?
Yeah, I would say overall experiences. I mean, the day to day, and I'm sure you had experiences probably at Valor too, because you were teaching there, but you were mostly at Harvest Prep, and so even talking about things, even as when we're talking about disappointing, that rules applied to certain students and maybe not to others, the handbook wasn't being followed, that there were special treatment going on, things of that nature.
Oh yeah, there were from that perspective, yeah, there was a bunch of situations where like the handbook wasn't being followed for certain students, mostly in athletics, most and so forth. There would be situations of of drug use and so forth where you would and mostly marijuana, vaping, things like that, and the situation would be brought to fruition. You bring it to somebody, and the next thing you know, that kid's in school the next day. Whenever in the handbook it states that that's a suspension for however long,
Hmm.
and so forth, and you're banned from certain activities. So, uh, all of those things, like I said, they were geared more towards athletics and so forth. But there was definitely some favoritism among students of how it was handled, how that situation was handled. I think I saw students that, or I remember students that were expelled for things, while others were basically just given a slap on the wrist.
Hmm.
And
For
I
the
think,
exact same behavior, or maybe even less than they were, and I'm aware of some of those situations as well.
yeah, and I mean, and there were, it got to the point where there were actually kids that were fed up with this. Okay, and I mean, I don't think I mentioned this one, but there was a situation with a girl who was she was actually in lower school. I think she was in sixth grade, and she she had said several times she did not want to be there. She didn't want to be at that school anymore. She had had enough, and or of different things. And
Sure.
For a sixth grader to say that, but then to be that mature about the reasoning and so forth, of why, like she was seeing things, and so forth, and that treatment and how it was handled among some kids versus others. And so what she ended up doing was she brought in a cap gun, and it was a little plastic. It was completely fake. It was multicolored, like purple, green, orange tip, see through, like ones that you could buy. You used to be able to buy them at the dollar store. Now I don't know where she
Almost
got
like
it.
a water gun or something, or like a
Almost,
cap gun.
yeah, it was a cap gun.
Okay.
And she didn't have anything in it, but she wanted me to see it as we were walking because I used to have to go pick up the kids, take them back to my classroom, right? So I'd walk them from either C wing or B wing all the way down to my class, which was in E wing, so on the other end of the building. And she noticed that I had turned around and I was standing like right beside her, and she just pulls it out of her fleece pocket and then quietly puts it back. And so now I have the obligation of taking that child to the office and so forth, explaining the situation. And she just said, "Yeah, I'm hoping to get expelled." And that's literally,
Oh.
she didn't want to be there anymore. So there was that
Mm.
situation. And, in the handbook, it said something like that was a 3-day suspension, and that's what she got. But it was
Hmm.
a terrible situation because of, like I said, the fairness. And I don't think we got too far into this, but I was the baseball coach,
Yeah.
and another situation like that arose on in that, a couple of them actually, and I didn't actively recruit players. I had kids coming in from the school and so forth. A lot of kids that weren't generally athletes, or maybe they played one other sport, but they were on the JV team, things like that. And
Sure.
so, but the one boy was an athlete, and he I remember distinctly he came to I think it was a game, and he was high. He was on, or he had gotten high before getting on the bus, or I think maybe someone brought him to the game that time. I don't remember exactly. And it slipped my mind. First of all, running around as coach doing all these other things until I had them like running the bases during warm up, and he's just like totally not with it. He said something to the effect of, "I feel like the Flash, man," or something, and I'm not completely naive and put two and two together, and so I benched him, and I made the report and so forth. Next thing I know, that kid's at practice again. He's at school, uh, and all this stuff. And I'm getting texts from his parents, about why he's being benched and so forth. And I told them the situation. Of course, they weren't happy about it, but yeah, there was clear
But
favoritism.
isn't that administration's job to have a conversation with not only the student, but with the parents to explain that these are our rules, this is what the handbook states, and this is what the penalty for that is?
Yeah, of course, and that's all in there. And the students sign the handbook and so forth. Uh, they know the guidelines. They go over it, but it's just not held. No one's held to it, and or well, only certain people are held to it.
Well, only, yeah, that's what I was going to see, because I know of kids that have been penalized and even expelled for things that were less egregious than athletes or favorites that are they can get away with almost anything.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very true within itself. They do act like they run the school, and they know it. And then there was a situation with another boy. He was another one that was an athlete. He was on the team, and I do remember like almost getting in trouble for his shirt shoulder getting hurt. Um, and yeah, and his shoulder wasn't exactly hurt. He had pitched a game, and his shoulder was feeling sore from it. And there's
Mhm.
regulations in baseball how many pitches you can throw, and so forth, per week, and things like that. And I was well monitored within that. He was well within it. He was just a little out of shape,
Okay.
with pitching.
But you
But
almost got in trouble by whom?
I remember there was a meeting where I was asked to I was coming in with members of the what who was it like the athletic director and so forth, saying, "Hey, uh, he's complaining of his shoulder hurting, like saying you're having him throw too much and things like that." So it was
Oh,
almost like a contract type of thing for a professional player, where like, oh, it's not in my contract to do this type of thing. And I just kind of laughed it off. I didn't even take anything of it. They were incredibly rude. Another coach was incredibly rude, and I just sort of brushed it off. I didn't think twice about it because at that point in time, I was checked out with that type of stuff. I
okay.
was yeah, I was just like, no, I'm not even giving them the time of day with this. So, but needless to say, that student did not pitch again, but his own actions later on, because of favoritism, he got away with quite a bit. Um, but his own actions later on did lead him to get expelled. So,
Wow.
yeah, so
Well,
he,
I'm shocked that they even went through with it, but maybe they didn't have any other choice at that point.
yeah,
Um,
for him, there was definitely a situation where they didn't have any other choice. There was, yeah, it was a pretty bad situation, um, for him and his choices leading up to that, and it involved another student. So it was not a good thing. He should have
did the
been.
other student get expelled as well? Do you know?
No, no, she did not. Thankfully, because she did not actually do anything in this regard. Um,
Okay.
yeah, at least yeah. So she was pretty much innocent of it. She was. The sad part is actually they were both students of mine in class as well, and so
Mhm.
it became like a whole thing of keeping them apart. But he was eventually expelled, and that was the right choice, and it should have happened sooner for other things, but that one finally, they did make that choice. So, but if it was anyone else, he would not have been given, or they would not have been given that many opportunities.
Right.
And yeah,
And what does that say to the rest of the kids? Because there are plenty of kids that, are more artistic or more, brainiacs than maybe the athletes, right? And so just because you don't play a sport and, maybe like one of the cool kids or something, then that you have to really toe the line because you don't get all of the extra leeway and the extra attention and getting away with things as kids that are favorites and or athletes. But I believe most of the kids that were kind of on that favorites list mostly were athletes.
yeah, yeah, and I think it goes back to the recruiting. Like, these kids were recruited, they were made these promises and so forth, and eh, you know, along with
But they're
that,
not
it's
supposed to do that, right? Like they're not supposed to recruit kids to go to Harvest Prep or any other school for that matter for athletics, correct?
right. Yeah, no, there's a definite gray area, and there's a fine
Okay.
line that they do walk. But they have, in my understanding, gotten in trouble for it in the past. And as one of the head coaches there, I did not recruit, but you could tell the difference, right? Our baseball team was, full of players that hadn't played travel teams. They hadn't played for other, school districts mostly. If they transferred in, they played ball, that's one thing. But I didn't go out seeking those players. Other coaches were going out seeking players through whatever means and things like that, and recruiting them to come to the school. I know scholarship incentives were offered to many and
Mm,
things like that. And that's just like coming from, and I don't necessarily know the legality of that, but I do know that it was brought to me by many of the students. Like they would boast to you like, "Hey, I'm here on a scholarship, to play football, or I'm here on a scholarship, to play basketball." Different things like that. They would tell you whether they were supposed to or not. I don't know, but I do think that that's like yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that a lot of people don't like about the school, and a lot of the schools in their sports division don't like, because that's one of the ways that they blow everybody out of the water. Um, they have multiple kids coming in from different locations that are coming there just to play sports.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm. Well, and then kind of, being left to their own devices, it sounds like in the classroom and other areas. And even, even the kids that are doing the right thing, unfortunately, they're not getting the highest quality education, even though the most of the teachers that are there for the right reasons, and they want to be there to help these kids get to the next level, but they're fighting against all of these other intangibles that I think they probably never expected that they were going to be up against.
yeah, I mean, they're fighting. So they're fighting the battle of the school, and then they're fighting often the battle of their own experience. A lot of teachers that are hired there are first year teachers. They are, oftentimes inexperienced within a classroom. And, to kind of go along, and you had mentioned that in a previous episode as well, about the teacher qualifications and licensures and the non-tax certificate. Well, there are pathways to become a teacher if you don't have any of like the initial like teacher licensures and stuff.
Sure.
Uh, and the non-tax is one, and a lot of people that transition careers and so forth, they want to become teachers. That's a pathway that they go, and they do get hired on in a private school, and then they start completing the requirements. So, but to be hired into your subject, you are supposed to have like so say in the state of Ohio, to get an alternate licensure, which is what it's called if you have, or if you are not a teacher, you want to become a teacher, to go to the alternate licensure pathway, you have to have a certain number of credit hours in the subject that you teach, or a degree in the subject that you want to teach. Okay? Uh, but there's no
And that
requirement.
shows that you have mastered
Right.
the skill sets and the knowledge in that subject group.
Right. So yeah, if you study biology but you didn't study education, you obviously have enough credits to teach science. You see what I
Hmm.
mean? Or biology
Sure.
on some level. And then you can go through the process of licensure, which is there's multiple ways to do it. You could do like an actual, certification course. You can do it's called the IPTI, Intensive Pedagogical Training Institute, offered at Ohio State. It's all expensive, but you can do it. Um, and you complete those programs and you get your initial 4-year alternate resident educator license.
Hmm.
After that, you have to proceed to your 5-year professional license. But like I said, a lot of the teachers, they're either first year on that non-tax, they haven't even started this process, or they're in the middle of the process, or they're, like I said, they're at the very beginning. Very few of them are at the end of the process. And the problem with that is that, like you said, baptism by fire. My entire experience there from the get go, they're thrown into a classroom. Here you go. There's no mentoring. There's nothing like that. There's nobody there to help you along the way, and so it's basically sink or swim. So when you look at it from that perspective, a lot of the teachers are going to be heavily frustrated. They're going to have a lot of trial and error, and it's going to
Hmm.
take them a while. Are they going to figure it out? Yeah, I think a lot of them are. But I do also believe that there are many teachers that are hired there that do not have um, the credit hours to be teaching what they're teaching. Um, and I do believe that there are teachers there that don't have, or that are not even, part of that process of, gaining their licensure.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really where a huge problem lies. And I know
Yeah.
that that happens, Now that's not something that's just Harvest Prep, but I remember there was a custodian actually that worked at Harvest Prep for a little while there, and then he became a substitute teacher at Harvest Prep. He was a music
Oh, I know
teacher.
who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a music teacher at another private school, and the man has never taken a music course in his life. Like,
Oh,
yeah, like we had a long talk about that. He's a nice enough guy. He's a wonderful person, and there's like I said that, and you said this before. There are wonderful people there. There really are wonderful people
sure,
there.
sure.
Wonderful teachers and so forth.
Well, and it's not, we're not trying to like slam anybody because, after that episode, I did hear from some teachers and even some that taught my kids. And the point was not to slam any of them because I think that they were all doing the best they could do. But the point is that if you are on that track, just like you said, and you have a desire to become a teacher, and the only way to do that is to start with that non-tax licensure, that there should be other requirements that you're going through, that you're actually working towards something, not being on a non-tax license for 20 or 30 years and never having to prove whether you've mastered those areas, that you're getting continued education so that you're keeping up with the times, that you have enough support, that you have collaboration, all of the things that you would expect from a school, especially that touts how successful they are and how successful their kids are that graduate from there. But the test scores and the things that I've already shown have proven that that's just unfortunately not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest problem is that, you know, do I think that there's anything wrong with that transition like we were talking about? Like we're not slamming teachers or anything. I
Sure.
never believed that you
Yeah.
were. But yeah, there needs to be something or some type of pathway to give them what they need to know. Classroom teaching is it's not something that you can just go into and automatically do. And no amount of like professional development at the beginning of the school year is going to help you with that. It's just not going
Right.
to happen. You need constant support, especially as a first year teacher. So, and nobody gave that, and or nobody was willing, or there was nothing set in place for them. I mean, there wasn't even hardly curriculum set in place for the teachers.
Right.
They had to, design their own, which was often times um, built around whatever test they were trying to have the kids succeed at taking,
Yeah.
and so forth. And say, yes, you're teaching to pass a test. Obviously, test scores aren't successful, so what they're even trying to do there isn't working. So there just has to there comes a time when they have to admit, and they should admit, that they need to revisit things, that there are members of administration that really have no idea what they're doing, and
Right.
yeah, and they need to kind of step back, or they need to pursue things from their own standpoint of qualification and figure that out.
Absolutely. And I mean, you kind of answered the question, but from your stance as an actual teacher there, that not only taught there for several years, but your son went to school there, and then obviously you have friends there that were teachers. How do you and maybe you don't want to speak for anyone else, but how do the teachers feel they are being treated and being supported by administration?
Yeah, for the most part, the teachers definitely feel similar to what I felt when I was there, or what I feel now. But it's kind of like, and we mentioned this. I think I told you about this before too. But it's kind of like when you walk around that place, you have to really be careful about who you talk to, and you have to. You can't be um, very open about your thoughts if they are counter to anything Harvest Prep, anything World Harvest. It's almost like a 1984 Orwellian scenario. You're careful of who you speak to. And that goes back to, a couple of things. Like you could talk to someone, you think that they're your friend and so forth. Next thing you know, there's a meeting happening and you've said something or totally wrong, and oh my gosh, you're going to hear about it. And I remember one of those things too, like we mentioned with the chairs or the seats whenever they were replaced.
Yeah.
I was walking,
When they wanted us to buy.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I was walking to the tabernacle with a teacher who was hired in the exact same time as I was, and so forth. And we had been there, together the entire time. I thought I could, probably trust this person, and so forth as we're walking. And I think I said that I was like, I wonder how much of of our salary they're going to ask for next. Some little comment. My filter was gone at this point. It's like I said, I think that third or fourth year that I was there. Next thing I know, we're in a staff meeting, and you know, uh, what was it? Well, I think it would have been my third year. We're in a staff meeting, and they said, "No, we're not asking for your salary back," and stuff like that. And I'm like, basically quoting me verbatim and staring right at me is, a particular administrator, and I'm sitting there like, "Are you kidding me right now?" You know,
Mhm.
Scenarios like that happened often, and so you didn't really know who you could trust. So it was pretty tense amongst teachers. You had your small group if you had that of who you could talk to, but for the most part, the teachers that did or that were a part of that or were like myself, like yourself, didn't go to church there. We were all kind of in the same mindset. Um, yeah, of those types of things about you're always frustrated. It was hard. It was a hard work environment. Um, and a lot of teachers, like I said, and even, I mean, I got frustrated a couple of times. I don't think there may have been one time when I got really frustrated and I raised my voice, and I really raised my voice to the kids. But it was high school, and and there was like a particular situation that happened. But I think I lost it for a minute. I had to bring myself
Mhm.
back in. Like, whoa, this is wrong. This is not how like um, educators should act. So, but yeah, that's kind of what you're dealing with. That's kind of what you're up against all the time. If you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, you don't know how involved they are in the church. You're just basically shooting yourself in the foot at that point. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Would you say, from your experience, is Harvest Prep a Christian school?
no, no, definitely, I wouldn't say so at
Why?
all.
Why do you say that?
Well, so many happenings, so many things that kind of go into what you would call a Christian environment, they didn't exactly foster well. They tried to mask it and so forth, but I didn't feel any sense of, that I was learning, and my son certainly didn't, his time spent there, feel like he was learning anything of, you know, faith-based value. Um,
Okay.
so, and he expressed that a lot, and especially, one thing that was always done was, I believe it was on Wednesdays was lower school chapel,
Yes.
upper school chapel was on Fridays.
Fridays,
And
right.
and one of the things that had well, okay, so every teacher was required to go to upper school chapel on Friday. And then lower school chapel was the same, like everybody was there. So I was attending both because I would have to take whatever class I had during that time for lower school into the chapel. Um, and there was a situation with my son actually in one of the lower school chapels where him and his friend, uh, all the kids were asked to like run down to the what the I don't know, the altar.
Mhm.
And him and his friend, they decided they didn't want to. And so they just sat there and they were like, no, we don't want to really deal with this. And they got scolded for that, and
Hmm.
told that. weren't really praising God or anything like that. And my son is basically a 30-year-old man trapped in a child's body. He's incredibly mature, and he's always going to say like the most polite thing possible. But like I said, at that point in time, I had lost, whatever. I think I knew this was my last year, and I think I had an idea that it was probably going to be my last year. Um,
Okay.
Going into it. I think as the year unfolded, not at the beginning, but towards the end, I knew I was like, okay, this is probably, this might be it for me. And that was something where I went over and I told the person, teacher to teacher, but more so parent to teacher to back off. This is like, you're not going to do that. And, I didn't talk like that to anybody there ever, really. It was like not that type of person. But then I did because, first of all, that's my child. Second of all, why are you getting into a child's face and telling them what they're doing is, not worthy whenever they just don't want to run down to an altar to catch balloons, I think was the whole thing.
Right. Right. And was this at the time where they had the entire lower school in the chapel, where it was like the kindergartners up to fifth grade?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that was a problem in its own right, because what what a kindergartner and a first grader can understand and be entertained, by, when it comes to music and the Bible and Bible stories, is much different than, a fourth, fifth, or a sixth grader. But you put all of these kids together and expect that they're all getting the same level of, um I don't want to say entertainment, but that's essentially what it is it's that time frame that they're, playing games and maybe singing a couple of songs. And I don't know if anybody really ever goes into any Bible stories, but um you would never put kindergartners and first graders and then fourth and fifth graders together and expect that they're going to learn things at the same time frame or be entertained by the same thing. So I know they did that because lack of time, lack of resources. The tabernacle was, you had to request time of when you wanted to be in there. So, there was a lot of hoops to jump through. And so that was probably the most time effective way of making sure that the kids at least were going to chapel, even if the older kids really weren't getting much out of it.
Right, yeah, and like you said, the time and then the resources, the people that just needed to be there for a chapel service, which was most of the time put on by Valor students, and or so it was another chunk of their time that was
Mhm.
taken away to go do this, service, and I think later then or towards the end, I think the what was she the like the youth pastor, one of the youth pastors started
She
coming
was
in.
kind of like the kids ministry director.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, she
she's still
started
there.
coming.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I
yeah,
imagine. Um,
yeah.
she started coming in and doing stuff and things like that, and I remember that was when it happened because, he was like he was really upset too about like being called out just because he didn't want to run down there with all these other kids, um, and like jump around and like and things like that for these balloons, and I just remember that distinctly, and I just think that that's not you're not helping anything by scolding a kid for being more mature. I mean, and I don't mean that against other kids on that grade or on that grade level, but
Sure.
he's past that point he was past that point in his life where, like you said, those things don't excite him. Like,
Hmm.
and the same thing with some of the other kids. Like, those things don't generally need to or excite them, and they don't need to. There's other ways for them to learn now, or other ways for them to enjoy things. So, Uh,
Well, and if they're going to be so concerned about that to the point that they're calling out a fourth grader or a fifth grader, I'm not sure what grade your son was in, but they're not concerned that he doesn't even have a homeroom classroom teacher.
yeah, and that was, I'm sorry, yeah, that's another big thing. He did not have a homeroom teacher that year. Yeah,
And
you know,
many families left that year, even families that were attached to the church pulled their kids out because we could not, and I'm saying this from now an HR stance, we could not get a teacher to stay in that grade level. I think I hired 3 or 4 teachers that year just for that grade level, and they all left.
yeah, and yeah, I remember that distinctly because it was such a, it was almost a joke, and because it was like, I remember previously there was a problem with getting sixth grade teachers,
Yes.
and I mean I think that that always remained a problem, but that particular year, fourth grade was the problem, and I can't remember if there was 3 classrooms or 4 classrooms of fourth grade teach or for fourth grade, but I know they ended up just kind of rotating and switching kids, and my son's particular class, like, they when they were in their homeroom idea, they were just on Chromebooks, and there was no instruction really or anything like that. The instruction that came, I believe, came from, for a particular subject, came from a third grade teacher. They would go down and see a third grade teacher, um, which was like, and I believe that they were doing like the same thing as the third graders. They probably were doing the same thing as third grade, you know, and that's just not sustainable. That doesn't work. You
Mm-mm.
think about that. That's like, that's pure survival mode. Um, that's
And that's
problem.
what it felt like, even from my perspective, that's what it felt like. You're looking for any solution to the problem, and nobody, no good teachers are applying for jobs, in the middle of a school year. And so you're trying to scrimp and scrape together a teacher that will work out, but even the ones that were qualified that we hired, they would not stay because the environment was so toxic and there was no support. I mean, even just the things that you mentioned, for somebody that's worked in more professional environments, these would be things that would send a lot of people over the edge, and it quite frankly did.
Oh, it absolutely did. There were teachers. I remember there was a scenario where 2 teachers were actually fighting outside of my classroom, and they were, and I don't mean fist fighting, but they came pretty darn close. It was a complete argument, yelling and screaming at each other, with both of their classes present.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, both of their classes present, and
Mm-hmm.
the argument was about the time in which one's music class started and the other one's ended, because that was their planning time. Uh, and it wasn't very long, you know, uh, like I said, I think that the classes then were 30 minutes, and you can take about 10 minutes of that away, because of walking back and forth from B or
Yes.
C wing down to E wing and back and so forth. So really, you may end up with a 15-20 minute window to plan whatever it is that you need to do. Or like, if you're not, or for those that aren't aware, teachers have, or most teachers get what's called a planning period. And it's a block throughout the day where they can actually build their lesson plans or build their units for what they're going to teach. This is the time whenever you're actually writing things out. And lesson plans, it's not like, oh, you don't just write like one little sentence, like, oh, I'm going to cover this, so I'm going to do that. No, you write out what you're going to teach, you break it down into groups as far as timing, and you're very intentional with it. And lesson planning takes a long time,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to do it and to do it right. And then not only did we have to, or do you have to lesson plan, but at Harvest Prep, every, I believe it was either, I can't remember, I think it was every Monday, you had to submit your lesson plans. You had to
Yes.
make sure you're so that the administration could see that they were there. They were looking through your lesson plans, and so forth, to see if you were teaching what you should be teaching or what they thought you should be teaching. But to be honest with you, I don't think they even knew what, what
Well,
the
many teachers weren't even submitting them. So, that, I mean, if you're not submitting them at all, there's really nothing to review. But I mean,
But how
the
could you
planning
with the
period is,
yeah? I
uh,
mean, it was a
it
complete
was
joke.
pretty non-existent. We had plenty of teachers that never got to eat lunch. They
Yeah,
never got to go to the bathroom. And you're talking from the time that they started till the kids left, and then they could finally go to the bathroom, grab something to eat. But then they're required to still do these lesson plans. So you're either staying after for who knows how long and working on that. You're working on it from home, or I don't even know when you got it done because you're teaching all these grades, then you're going to Valor, you're coaching baseball, you've got a family. I mean, when do you even figure it out?
uh, you. I mean, summer. Yeah,
Well, you
I
would
think
almost have to, right? I mean, you would almost have to just take any amount of time that you can find in summers when you're supposed to be off, but you were probably looking ahead and realizing what you had laying in front of you for the next school year. But a
yeah,
lot of teachers didn't do that, or they couldn't do that, or didn't even have the forethought to do that because they were new.
they were new or they were. I mean, they were holding down their own like supplemental income, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
I know a lot of teachers. One one teacher, he was working as a pharmacy tech at night. So I mean, it wasn't just me doing this. It was, even though I had K through 12, many of these teachers were doing this. I had another teacher, um, or a good friend of mine, who was going to like an Amazon plant, at night and working from like, 5 or 6 p.m. to like 3 a.m. and doing that, like Thursday through Sunday, to help make something make it livable, make it work, because that was the situation that we were all in. Others tutored, others were like, honestly, others were like fighting over the latchkey jobs or the extended care jobs because you were getting paid, you could get paid to stay a couple hours extra to be an extended care teacher. But yeah, so the 15 basically, I mean, we could call it that, for lower school. At least I can't say exactly what it was like for upper school teachers with their planning. My mindset wants me to believe that it was a bit better. But
It was more stable up there
yeah,
for whatever reason. And again, I think some of that came down to the fact that they had more control up there with money, with resources. And I think, they did have more support staff up there too. But they didn't have enough to let the lower school borrow anyone to try to help, get everybody on the same level playing field. And the lower school wasn't given, the same amount of resources, oftentimes as the upper school. And so that's probably um, that's probably one of the main things. Okay, I think I only have a couple more things because I know we've been on here a while.
if you give me a second.
There was because I want to end with kind of not only like how you left, but if you've kind of had to like go through like a deprogramming process once you left there. But there was a story that you shared with me when we talked. And I want you to share that story, of course, without the names. But this was an experience for you that not only kind of blew your mind, but like broke your heart, right? And I don't know if it ups I mean, it was upsetting to me when you told me about it, that you would even be expected to do something like this, but um, I'll kind of let you share the experience. And this would have been, was it right before you quit, or somewhere like in the year before that?
Yeah, no, it would have been that year.
That year. Okay.
Yeah, so the experience you're talking about, yeah, is incredibly heartbreaking. It's one that is just gonna stick with me forever because it was, and there were a few experiences like this, but this one always stood out to me. Um, what happened was I was like you said, I was a baseball coach, and I remember during that time I'm at the school constantly. I'm there early before the day starts. I'm there oftentimes until 10, 11 p.m. And that day I had to get there early for whatever reason. I think I had to go grab equipment down from the field or something. And I'm walking in to the school, and I get a phone call from a student who, I mean, I just I want to kind of state he was such an amazing kid. You know, to have in class on a team, he was like, you know, one of the kids that everyone loved to have around in class. He was a really good kid, and he's calling me. He's very upset, and he states, and this kind of gives you where his mind is thinking about, the things that he is committed to and so forth. He says, I'm not going to be able to make the game today. And I was like, okay, well, why do you is everything okay? Why? And his response was, no, my dad shot himself. And at this point, I think he might have been 15, and to say it, and he's, upset. And so I immediately kept him on the phone. And, you would think, and I want you to think about like, a, first of all, an educator's response, or what we're kind of trained to respond whenever those things kind of present themselves. First thing that you need to know is whether the child's safe, right?
Hmm.
That was kind of where I kept my mind was like, are you safe? Are you okay? Like, is, the firearm still around type of thing. Well, as I'm walking into the building, these are the things that I'm asking him. When I get into the building, um, the head of the school is right there. And so I walk over to him, interrupt his conversation, and I'm like, you need to hear this. You need to, know what's kind of happening. And I told him the situation and what had happened. And his response to me was to ask the child if he was joking. His response, well, yeah, that's literally what he said. He said, "You need to ask him right now, is this a joke?" And and that doesn't seem so shocking until you think of the context. There's a child there that is calling the people that he trusts after probably one of the most devastating experiences of his life,
Right.
right? And their first response is, "Are you joking? Is this a joke? Is this a prank?" And then I also want to bring back what I said previously about this particular student. He is an amazing kid. I mean, if you could clone him, 30 times and put him on a team, or clone him 30 times and put him in a classroom, like you would. He was
Hmm.
awesome. And I still think very highly of him. And just to be put in that scenario where, this administrator didn't take the phone from me to say that. He told me to say it. Told me
Mm.
he wouldn't do it himself. I had to like ask him as his coach, you know, say, is this a joke? And that was just, I couldn't imagine what would have gone through my mind at that point in time if I was asked that, you know,
No kidding.
is that at that age. Level of disappointment I think would have been devastating. And if he's ever listening to this, I want to formally apologize to him. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that that happened, or that your situation was what it was, but I'm also sorry about the reaction to it because that's just terrible.
And did you feel like you couldn't say no to the head of
Yeah,
school? You
yeah,
felt like you could not say no to him.
yeah. I felt like I couldn't say no. There was no way that I was able to say no, because they know your situation. They know what was happening in my life that year. Had a new baby on the way. I was, the sole provider for my family. Like, they knew they had me. Like I was, if I were to, say or do something out of line that they would consider out of line, they knew that that wasn't going to happen. And, and I started to kind of, like I said, I started to kind of push back a little bit on some things. And I think that first of all, that's why we got, the percussion equipment. That's why we got, certain things like that done. But that was an awful scenario where you thought that you couldn't do anything. And there were multiple like that. That was one. Another involved a teacher, and she was a very young teacher. I think she was maybe her first or second year there. And like I said, I all of the what we there was like a duty where we were like that we worked together, and so we often talked during that time, and so forth, and built kind of like a friendship during that and so forth. And I always gave her advice and things, and she was fun to talk to, like I said. But the one day I remember I was down there and I walked in and she just looked stone faced, like totally upset. And I asked her what was wrong, and she said, well, she was wearing like this I don't know what you call this, like a shawl or a blanket or something, because she was cold, and it was like a day where the heaters probably weren't working right. And she said, well, you wouldn't believe, someone walked in here and asked me if I was cold because I was wearing this, and I said, yeah, and she said they asked if I could come inside the blanket and help keep me warm. And
Oh, yeah, I was a part of that situation. Yeah.
yeah, and
So
talk
this
about
was
feeling
a male
male,
said this to a female teacher.
and
Yes.
someone that, to my knowledge, wasn't even really employed by the school. I was always somewhat confused about why he was there,
Hmm.
um, and around the
At
kids.
that point, he actually was, but that was like his second day of work.
Well, yeah, because that was the thing. No,
Like he
he
was
already
volunteering
started.
up until then. Yeah.
He was
Yep.
volunteering, um, and yeah, up until that point. And I just remember looking back on that now, like I felt as if I was like, oh my gosh, what can be done about this? Like, what could happen? And she felt scared. I mean, on top of all of the other things, probably like, completely violated and so forth. And then I felt like a total piece of work because I almost felt too scared to help her, you know, because of what would happen to either of us. And
Gotcha.
to both of us with our position. And that was how you felt. I mean, I went through a pretty bad leg surgery as well. And I don't think we talked about this, but I went through a pretty bad leg surgery. But this is also the kind of insecurity that you feel. You're not really given much as far as paid time off,
Right.
you know, especially for those types of things. So my leg surgery was awful. It was a terrible thing that had to be done and fixed. And I had been essentially I'd been walking on a torn ACL for over 20 years, or which I never knew. So when it was discovered, I ended up going through the repair. They had to do like a really extensive surgery, and my options were limited as far as coming back to work or taking
Yeah.
time off. I couldn't. I had to, and so the doctor and I was like, well, you can go back to work in a couple of weeks. And I was like, no, I can't. I need to go back tomorrow, type of thing. So we came up with a plan where, I mean, for, you know, 2 or 3 weeks, I was going around the school in a wheelchair.
I
Because,
remember that.
yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
and that was why. And, areas because I couldn't afford to take time off. So that's like what you felt. You felt like you couldn't, you didn't have those options. You didn't have those things. And then in that situation, you felt like, oh my gosh, what would happen to both of us if either of us actually said this or brought it
Mhm.
forward? And I think eventually she did. And
She did say something actually that day. And it was handled, but you could, I mean, I not only saw the stone face look on her face, like you mentioned, but also the panic and the fear that this could come back on her just for the simple fact that she had the guts to say something and wanted to make sure that the situation was handled, but that she also wasn't going to get some blame for the situation happening altogether.
yeah, yeah, and that
Yeah.
was, I mean, I felt so bad for her because, this was maybe her second year out of college, that she was,
Yes.
you know, and to have an experience like that with someone where, no one was watching and this person was supposed to be someone that was like trustworthy. And,
Sure.
and you know, um,
Hmm.
that's why he was allowed to volunteer, I guess.
Right.
Uh, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, those were just a couple of the first one though. I mean, involving the student, I just can't apologize enough for that.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. Well, and that was, yeah, that whole situation, I had no idea when you told me that that even happened, and that you were even put in that situation to um have to question him in that way. I mean, it's just, it's heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking when you told me. It's still heartbreaking, and hopefully um he's doing better, and kind of working through, because I don't know if you ever get through a lot of that grief, and that's a very pivotal time in a young man's life to lose their dad.
Yeah, yeah, and I hope it didn't. I hope it didn't change him.
Sure.
Because you're talking like he always happy to be there, always in like, this amazing mood. Like, and I remember there was a certain baseball game where everybody was underperforming, and I threatened because he was like, one of the younger kids, like the freshman, and obviously, you play the upperclassmen and stuff like that, and we rotated him in and stuff. But yeah, I remember he was sitting the entire time like, I will go in for this person, I will play this position. Like, you don't even know how to play that position, you've never done it. He's like, I will do it. I mean, just a cool kid. And so I hope he didn't lose that. I hope he didn't lose himself, um, in that, or in that kind of, regard. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of brings us then to you exiting and leaving Harvest Prep, and and I was involved in that process as well. But I think it was it's an interesting perspective for me, and hopefully even for the people that watch, that you see situations from several different perspectives, not just from one. So let's talk about the situation that happened right before you ended up giving your resignation and leaving.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of a, to get into that one, there was a position that opened up or that was being created. Where they decided it was a curriculum coordinator position.
Hmm.
And I mentioned previously, I finished my master's in 2019, which was in curriculum and instruction. So I was qualified for this position. The reason why I chose to do curriculum and instruction instead of a music education degree is because before I was working at Harvest Prep, when I was at Eastland Career Center, I was already working as their online curriculum coordinator. I was
Oh,
already
okay.
doing things like that there. So that was part of, or in their adult workforce education system. Um, so that was a part of it. And I kind of came in like, hey, I'm definitely qualified for this position. And in my mind, it was, this is going to be a raise in pay, and that's what I was told, was that it was going to be a significant raise in pay. And so I applied, I went into the interview, and I was hired. Now, before, and this is how like almost catty and how word gets out and so forth and things like that. Before that even happened, before I was even interviewed, um, it was told to me that the position was given to somebody else, and that was or like then this person was the person telling everybody that they were already given the position, and before the interviewing process was even done. Now that's just
Right.
like teacher immaturity and so forth, but you kind of think to yourself, okay, where did this come from? But I went through the interviewing process. I was offered the position and I accepted. Um, when it came time to go into the, well, we went into the meeting and I was given the contract. The contract was, I believe, for, I think it was for $1,000 or $2,000 more than what I was making as a teacher. And to give you kind of the idea, that position is worth in a public school district, they get paid probably three and a half times that much.
Hmm.
Is what I
For
was
sure.
offered. And
Yeah, you
I
well into the six figures for that position in public school.
Right, and of course I'm not delusional. I knew that that was not going to be the case at all for this.
Sure.
That's not the point, but I thought that it was going to be something that was going to at least be a bit more, obviously.
Significantly more than $1,000 or $2,000 than your salary that you were already making as a teacher.
Yeah, so when I finally got that and I saw the contract, I was like, you know, I was just devastated. I was devastated.
Hmm.
And we went into a meeting about it and so forth, and
And that was you, me, and the head of school.
right, we went
Okay.
into our meeting and had our discussion, and we presented, kind of my case for it, and we talked about it and so forth. And then later on, it came back with another offer that was like a little bit more. I think it was,
Hmm.
like $2,000 more. Um, but at the same time, I didn't have, or at this point in time, once again, like they knew my situation. They knew, um, like I said, provider for the family, baby on the way. My son goes there, and so forth. My wife is going to have to take time off work, and things like that. So I had to agree to that contract, and I was already doing things for that position before I was even in it. Like, I was
Hmm.
already doing a lot of the things. Like there was a trip that I was asked to go to, and like for a curriculum kind of thing in Washington D.C. And they paid for it. The school didn't. The company actually paid for it because they want you to buy their curriculum and so forth to bring back. And so I did was doing things like that, and we agreed to buy. I think I think they only bought the science portion of the curriculum um,
Okay.
from this company. But that was like a nice commitment, and then I signed the contract and so forth. Over the next few months, what ended up happening was my daughter was born in the summer. She ended up having some pretty significant health problems. And so we were in the NICU, or my wife actually started with health problems. She had hypertension that developed into preeclampsia. And we were in just like we were going into like a, kind of routine doctor visit, and they said, it's time to go to the hospital. It's time to go. So when she was admitted, emergency C-section type of thing, and she ended up being okay. My daughter, though, had a stay in the NICU for a month, almost exactly
Mm.
a month. And it was a tough time. It was very tough. She was premature. There was a lot of things that were going on. She ended up having to be put on oxygen, and she was on oxygen for a very long time, 24/7, not just in the NICU when we got home. That was, part of her condition. Um, so, not to mention, a couple surgeries and so forth. Well, what ended up happening was I was offered my current position pretty much. I actually, it was the same day that she was discharged from the NICU. And we had already started working for like maybe a week or two back at Harvest Prep. At least the administrative groups were there. I don't think
Sure.
teachers were in. So I was going in. There were certain people that knew my situation, knew how things were going, and so forth. And that it was tough. Um, but I was offered a new position elsewhere that paid significantly more, and much better benefits. As you know, our health insurance was, um, wow,
Not good.
yeah, it was hard. It
And
was
it was
very,
not affordable either.
no, no, it was anything but affordable to be offered as a benefit, and that was one of the reasons I took the job to begin with, was to provide benefits.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I was offered that job, and to give you kind of the mindset of where you are whenever you truly believe that you're supposed to be at Harvest Prep and doing what you're doing. I mean, the person had to pull the yes out of me. I mean, I was giving like these runarounders, like I felt scared to accept this job, you know.
Hmm.
I was completely afraid. I was like, I think so. Yeah, that might work. And once again, I'm being offered a significant amount more, better benefits and so forth for this current position. But they ended up there like, so is that a yes? And I finally pulled it out of myself to say yes. Um, and at that point in time, I went in and I was very upset to be leaving the kids. I had spent so much time here, even though the kids already knew that I wasn't going to be their teacher anymore because of the
Right.
administrative role, but they knew that I was still going to be around. Um, and so, or they thought I was still going to be around. So, it was heartbreaking, but I submitted my letter of resignation. I received no response, and I don't think it
Right.
was. Yeah, there was no response, and my email, which was my communication with everybody, right? Every teacher that wasn't here and so forth, was just, or and you even like everybody there. My email was just deactivated within. I mean, it was within 24 hours. I think I logged on later that day to check, my email for something or to see if I got a response or someone said something, and I couldn't log in. Like my email was just completely deactivated, and that was that.
Which I don't even know how that happened because usually that request would come from me. And I know that I explained to you that there was really no response from my end because I couldn't get a response to the fact that you had submitted the resignation, and so it was, you don't know what to say because regardless of your position, even though I was the HR director, I couldn't make decisions without getting approval from my boss, who got approval from the Parsleys. And everyone kind of fell into that category, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it was the weirdest thing, and I think I remember what I was doing now. I was trying to log on to message the assistant athletic director about dropping off the baseball gear that I still had, or like the
Hmm.
things, or just a couple of things that I had that, and we had just gotten plaques and awards for the boys, and I wanted to give them to him, and I couldn't log in to get a hold of or to send this email to get a hold of anybody because yeah, it was deactivated. It was like um, the thought process was just like, wow, I gave 4 years of 100% of everything that I possibly had for this place, and I'm presented with a tough situation. And I had been presented with other tough situations that I knew about, but this really tough situation that finally, you know, uh, ended up with me actually really being blessed with this opportunity to
Sure.
take another way to provide for my family and do it in a wonderful manner. And that was the response was just shut down, nothing, you're nothing, bye. And that was it, Never, I don't think
Well,
I
I'm
ever,
sorry personally if I did anything that made you feel that way because I knew what a great asset you were to the school and I knew how much the kids loved you, but I also knew that you were more than qualified for the curriculum coordinator position as well. And but that you were in a situation where you were being offered a considerable amount of money to go take another position, and luckily, it seems like it's been a good decision, but me personally, I don't ever want to make someone feel like they don't matter, or that they haven't made a great contribution to whatever it is that we're talking about. So,
right. And I don't think that I ever thought that about you. I think that once again, it's the environment. It's the
sure.
thought that you don't know who's involved in what, and you're kind of, or who's involved with what and whom, and you're scared to
Yeah.
know, you know? Um, and that was kind of like, this was the real punch in the gut though, was after that did happen, after I left, it was a couple weeks later. I was still meeting with a teacher friend and or and I had been doing some work for them, like still like still another little side job, and I got a message from them. They were someone that did go to the church, and so forth, and they said, "Hey, I think they said something to the effect of, "Hey, I think you made the sermon," and I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And
Lucky you, right?
yeah, lucky me. And I want you to and everyone to like keep this in mind. I have maybe spoken 2 words to Rod Parsley in my entire life.
Hmm.
Okay, they were
Yeah, he
maybe
wasn't present at all in the school. I think that he used to come and talk to the teachers at some point in time, but
right.
he was never present in the school for at least your entire time there.
Yeah, and I think that one um I don't know, one time that unless well, okay, so he was there if something good happened, you know? So
Okay.
like he was there in like a pep rally if if the basketball team won like, the state championship or stuff like that, he would
Okay.
show up. And he showed up for one for us because we had a group of kids that they received like the highest rating at OMEA solo ensemble and stuff, and I think he showed up for that and once again wanted like a picture or something, and I kind of refused because I'm like, once again, I don't know you. I've never spoken to you. Like I'm not, you know, that way or a part of that, I've never but like other than that, like I said, maybe a hi, that's it. I've never really spoken to this man. And in that sermon, he proceeds to talk about how it's not his problem of, a baby born with health problems, or if, this type of thing's going on, or if you need more money, like that's not my problem. And it was incredibly personal. And I don't like to assume that things that are like that, that just because they relate to your situation are about you, but it was all so incredibly coincidental. And it was all very personal to my situation. And I
Sure.
also want to share this. My daughter almost died in surgery. shortly after that. So I hope he listens to this and kind of understands that. Um, and yeah,
Well,
she
that's the thing. I mean, there's so much lack of empathy and compassion, and the characteristics that you would um not only associate with a Christian, but especially a pastor, right? That claims to care about their flock and care about their staff and all of those things that you don't know anybody's name, you don't show up for anything, and then to top it all off, you want to make someone's story a part of your sermon, and with absolutely no regard or care for what they're going through, and having a child that has just been born with all of these health concerns. Instead of putting someone down in a sermon, why don't you go and visit them at the hospital? Why don't you send them something, or just show that you have any compassion whatsoever? And it was like the exact opposite.
yeah, and it was like in during that time I was well, you know what it's like to have a newborn, but I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't. I was still trying to give everything that I could while I was working there. Or
Sure.
to that point, I was basically staying at the hospital, leaving the hospital, and coming to Harvest Prep. I was still trying to give what I could give, on top of this, but then to like have, like I said, my daughter almost lose her life in this surgery, where she lost over half of her blood. Her hemoglobin was at 4. She was pale. I mean, she had to go back in for the surgery again. And yes, like we firmly believe the only thing that was keeping her alive was an IV in the circulation acting as her blood in her bloodstream. And to have this man who knows nothing of me, really, I mean, I'm less than a pawn to him, but at the same time, he's going to bring up my situation that he knows nothing about in his sermon because a he didn't want to pay me the equivalent of probably what you know less than the 40th percentile of what people make for that position elsewhere.
Hmm.
Because of that,
Or what
I
him and his daughter go spend on a shopping spree, with the church's money, by the way.
yeah, yeah. Because I asked for that, for something for a bit more, and then still left. That's how I was like, that was my goodbye from them, I guess, and with ever hardly a hello from them. Uh,
Right. Well,
it's
and I
just
also want to point out that he found out about that situation because, again, the head of school, which I know that you seem reluctant to say the name, but it's Mr. Mills. He was the principal, and then it was the head of school. He's Parsley's nephew, and best friends with Ashton, who is also his cousin. And so they're hearing all of these stories from him, and then utilizing it, in whatever way they can, use it in a sermon or get a laugh, or whatever they're using it for. And it's just disgusting. I mean, it just speaks to the mentality and the lack of empathy and love and compassion that any of them have.
yeah, yeah, and that's just about all you can say is and there are people that are believing in this man and in the people around him whenever um, that's his true personality. He does
Yeah.
not care. He doesn't care about any of it. He doesn't care about you. You're a dollar sign to him. And
Mhm.
that's just to find out in such a way. as that I didn't expect any type of grand send off. I don't want to put it that way, but just maybe a hey, thank you, we appreciate your time would have been nice, something like that. In an email, I'm not even asking for anything, but to just completely basically blackball me by cutting my email off. And then I never interacted with them after that, by the way. I never
Mhm.
interacted with anyone. I think I went in to drop my key off, and I dropped my key off at the front security desk as you walk in the vestibule and so forth,
Sure.
and left. And I think I had personal belongings still in that building, and I just never got them. I didn't want to go back. Um, and it's like that's you know you give everything, and then you're reminded that you're nothing. And but at the same time, unless you got money to give, then you're something to them, I guess. Like but that's my take.
Well, again, but it just like you said, again, it's just dollar signs and the the love and attention that you get, it's not real, it's fake. And you're only as good as the dollars that you have, and then if you don't have them to give anymore, you quickly find out where you are on the totem pole. And that's unfortunate. But it's how everyone leaves that place, regardless of what position you're in. Everyone that leaves there leaves, with this bad taste in their mouth, and then have to reflect back on everything that they went through, everything that they did, everything that they were a part of. And I mean, for you, did you feel like you had to go through like a healing process or a deprogramming process once you left there?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And
And
they
what did that look like for you? I mean, because I'm sure that there are teachers that were there when you were there. There are teachers that are there now, and some that have left that maybe they haven't figured out kind of how to move on because I mean it's it's so toxic and abusive. I feel like I mean I didn't even realize how bad it was until I was gone for about 8 months. And I knew it was bad. You know what I'm saying? But I didn't realize how much I was like desensitized to things because I just had to hear and see and do so many things that until I was gone for a while, I'm like, dang, that was messed up.
Yeah, no, I absolutely went through that, and still kind of go through it in some ways because there's still things that I'm like afraid to, ask, even though I know the answer is going to be positive. And this is all in my like current work environment. And as
Okay.
soon as I left and went into my, new position, I mean, I would ask things like, "Hey, where do I do this? When do I do this?" type of thing. All things that we were kind of told to do at Harvest Prep as teachers and things like that. And they just looked at me like I was crazy. Like, no, 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 nope, you don't have to do that. I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, you get a plan and a lunch, um, and it's incorporated in your union that is your time, or with the union, like that is your time. That is, you have to have it. And lo and behold, I mean, you become better at your job whenever you have those things.
Huh,
You
you're
get
not
to
burnt out all the time, right?
oh, and
Yeah.
but alongside with that too, like you mentioned it taking 8 months. For me, I can definitely see and say it's taken a little bit longer because even this year, which I've been in this position for a while, I asked another teacher. We were on lunch, and I was getting ready to go to lunch. I'd forgotten to pack my lunch and so forth. I didn't really want to eat, what's in the cafeteria that day, and I was like, "Are we allowed to, leave and grab something and come back?" She was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I've done it twice today." Like,
Well,
and
yeah, because the teachers were not allowed to leave Harvest Prep. Once they were there, they were there. They could not leave to do anything unless they were like taking the rest of the day off.
yeah, yeah, you were not
Yeah.
allowed to leave and come back. Um,
But
for whatever
students can
reason.
leave. Students can leave and go pick up lunch,
Yeah,
but
the
you
students can
can't.
DoorDash their lunch, but we can't.
Wow. Well, and that the school pays for oftentimes, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
know my son, was very much favored, and he was frequently given the school credit card for him and his friend to go get lunch, um and it would have been nice, maybe if they would have done that for the teachers sometimes instead of just doing it for the students. And I can assure you, my son did not need to have anyone buying him lunch. So
Yeah, I mean,
it's
it's
just
kind of
wild.
weird.
It's wild to even talk about some of this stuff and, almost relive it to a certain extent and just how bizarre and how did we make it almost, for me it was almost 4 years. It was probably 4 years for you. Like, how did we make it so long?
Yeah, it's like how did that happen, and how did it go by? And then
Yeah.
but the biggest thing too is like, I don't know, and maybe this goes for everybody listening, but believe the people around you. If you're working there and they're telling you to get out, believe them, you know?
Yeah.
I had, my own wife in my ear, like, you need to leave. It's time to be done. This is too much. And and I still felt that I had to give more and more to that place. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it gets you. And it goes back to that saying like my buddy said whenever I first got hired, don't drink the Kool-Aid. I didn't know what that
Don't
meant.
drink the Kool-Aid.
I thought like, it's like, oh, I'm not going to, church there or anything like that, but I was still definitely a part of it. But,
Yeah,
you
you're
know,
affected. I thought the same thing. And my brother said that to me, and I didn't really think anything of, but you are most certainly affected, but then you do feel an obligation to stay for whatever reason that is, whether, and you justify it. Oh, I'm staying for the kids. Oh, I'm staying because the staff members don't have any advocates or anyone that shows them love and compassion. I mean, you justify all of these things, all the while, like, you just continue to die inside. And then by the time you're able to leave or you get an opportunity to leave, like you said, you're almost like frozen and shell shocked. Like, can I say yes? Can I leave this place? Can I go and be treated the way that I deserve to be treated and earn a livable wage and at least get paid what I deserve? Because that's essentially what happened for me too. I left and everything got better. Um, but then, there was still an obligation I felt to make sure that people are aware of what this place is all about, and what people go through on a day-to-day basis there.
yeah. Yeah, and it's pretty yeah, it's pretty terrible to think about. And then, a lot of times I will say we at least people like myself don't know half of what was happening there. We don't know
Right.
half of what was going on while we were doing it, and that or while we were, a part of, the machine or whatever, being a teacher. You didn't know half of what was going on. Your
Yeah.
podcast has revealed so much in that, and even we mentioned like I taught for Valor. I felt so bad after I heard some of the things that was going on, for trying to be, just like a professor that was holding the kids accountable for not turning their work in, when
Right.
realistically they were, you know, doing all of this other stuff, all of these other work steady, and I remember I had one boy who kind of blew up at me, and I wasn't even being, difficult, but I had said something, to the effect about work, and he just was upset, he was in tears, and I knew something was going on, and I knew it wasn't me, but I wasn't sure what it exactly was happening. But in particular, it made sense because or after you talking about the work study program, all of the things these kids were going into or have to be a part of, because I saw him everywhere around the building, no matter what time of
Mm.
day I was there, you know, morning to night and anywhere in between. He was always working and always doing something. And I believe he was like work steady with like the facilities, team or something like that.
Okay.
And yeah, and it's just, now putting two and two together, it's like, man, what those kids are put through. Um, some of us really don't know and aren't really a part of what's going on.
Sure. Sure. I would say a lot. I would say there are a lot of staff members that just aren't, you think they know, but they really are not aware of the all of the obligations, especially those work study kids have. And that's probably one of the reasons I've had so many of them reach out and want to be on the podcast and tell their story, because they're giving uh a snapshot of what it's like to not only be a student, but then also be in that work study program, and then also a congregation member. And so they're kind of getting hit from all sides, and they, their home is there, it's at the dorm. So they never get a break from this stuff.
Right. And I'll tell you, it is so relieving to know that someone like yourself has started this and continued it, because it's just bringing all of these people um, closure. And with with what you're doing, and you're giving everyone a voice who's coming forward, because we're all sitting back here in this mindset like, was it me? Am I you know
Yeah. Yeah.
crazy for thinking this? Oh, wait, there's other people thinking the same thing. There's other people that have had these experiences or are seeing the same thing. And it's just amazing, because you're giving something back to people. And, I want to thank you for that. You're giving something back that people that have been there have clearly lost within themselves, whether it's confidence or um, whatever else. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing
Well,
that.
thank you for saying that. And that's always been the goal, is just to not only to expose, but also to say, there's been vindication, for a lot of people, and helping them understand that it wasn't just them, that there was a lot going on there, and they don't need to blame themselves, that they are one of many that have had experiences like this. And depending on how much time you're there and your experiences, what areas you were in, may determine how long it takes even to heal from all of this, because it's not, there's so much abuse, and it is a toxic environment, but it's verbal abuse, sometimes physical abuse, definitely spiritual abuse and psychological abuse. And when you do that all under the guise of it being God, and that if you leave, you're out of God's will, and if speak against what they're doing, you're out of God's will. And it's fear mongering, and that's not how God operates anyways, as far as I'm concerned. And I want people to know that too, that God is not the enemy here. It's how they're presenting him to be to the people that attend there and work there. And then they get um this sense of something that isn't even who God is. And that to me is also a very important part of the podcast, is making sure that people know that part, because after that place, so many people don't want to be a Christian, they don't want to go to church, they don't want to have a relationship with God, none of those things. And that to me is also heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
So
mean,
I appreciate you saying that, though. Before we end, is there anything else that we didn't talk about, or that you wanted to mention before we go?
I don't know. I would just say, if I ever, was like caught up in that place where, like I talked about, with like, if there's students sharing that I maybe said something out of, that I shouldn't have in that regard because of the belief of that place or these experiences, where I've raised my voice, as a teacher, I just want to say I'm sorry. Um, Valor students as well, I want to say I'm sorry. Baseball students or baseball players, it, the situations that we were put in. I'll leave with one more. We were put like there was a night. I'll leave this before we go, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm sorry, but there was a
No, it's
night
okay.
we were. I can't remember where we were going. We were going somewhere that was far out. You had to take a lot of back roads to get there. I can't remember what team we were playing, but on the way back, the bus driver, who was the head of facilities, maybe, I don't remember his
Okay.
name.
I think I know who you're talking about.
He was our bus driver, and these boys were scared for their life because on these back roads where it's 35, 40 miles an hour for a regular car, the one boy pulled out an app and he was doing and showed because he was scared and showed it to me. He was doing 67 miles an hour, and yeah, and my son was on that bus with us because my son would often have to come to the games with me, and I'm sorry that they were ever put in that type of situation where we were scared for our life because somebody wanted to get back, in time for whatever reason to, catch the end of whatever football game or whatever it was. I don't know why he felt the need to do that. But, once again, I brought that up and nothing was ever done about it. And he was our bus
Well, he's
driver.
another family member of the Parsleys.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are strategically placed throughout the organization. And so even when the Parsleys themselves are not right there, they are, they're pulling the strings for everything and everyone. And so you still get a version of them even if they aren't physically right there.
Yeah, and it's like, and you're in charge of a group of kids. These are your kids, other people's kids, and you're putting them in jeopardy, and in that way, and then in other ways, and so forth. Like, that's so unacceptable. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm the one responsible because I'm their coach. We
Right.
got on this and so forth. So I apologize to them too, just for any experience that they had, and hopefully, they're hopefully it doesn't have a long-term effect on their lives as students, players, or even coworkers, and teachers and so forth. I hope that everyone finds healing and or that has had something happen like this at that place. So
Well, thank you. And again, thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast and giving an experience and a perspective from a teacher. I think that's going to be super helpful for a lot of people that are listening, because I think there are a lot of teachers even that have left there that are reluctant to speak out for many of the same reasons that you've already mentioned. So thank you. Thank you everyone for watching, and please continue to like, subscribe, and share. And we will see you next week for another episode of Mega Maniacs. Have a good night.